Welcome to the Grammar Cat. I hope that you have a cup of tea or perhaps even a furry friend as we get ready to delve into today's video topic, which is verbs. But before we go any further, it's important to ask the question, why are we doing this? Well, by understanding verbs more fully, we have the tools to grasp tense as well as craft far more intricate sentences in ways that allow us to communicate our point more effectively to others. We're also able to better understand what other people have to say. So, in this video, I'm going to be giving you the knowledge and tools to effectively differentiate between different kinds of verbs, as well as teaching you the correct terminology. So, let's get started. Right, today we're going to look at verbs as being either finite or non-finite, and under non-finite we're going to be particularly looking at participles and infinitives, although there is another category called gerunds, but it won't be covered in this video. I'll probably have a video coming soon. So let's define a verb. Now a verb is an action word. Scratch, yawn, play, they're all verbs and things my cat loves to do. But there are other kinds of verbs as well. They could also be linking words. So the linking verb is words like is, are, am, and they link the subject to another word such as its adjective. So Twiggy is playful. There isn't an action word there per se, but it tells me a little bit more about Twiggy, that she is rather playful. The other type is a stative verb, and those are words like love, hate, believe. So sentences like Twiggy loves her kibbles and Twiggy hates dogs, those words like loves and hates in that situation is a stative verb. Now you wouldn't need to be able to distinguish between all those kinds of verbs, but knowing that they exist and that those words are in fact verbs is very helpful. So let's look at the two categories. We're going to look at finite verbs and non-finite verbs. So what is a finite verb? Well, a finite verb is a verb that can stand on its own. It has a subject, it holds number, and it tells me tense. While non-finite verbs can't stand on their own because they're missing one of those elements. Either they don't refer to a subject, it doesn't tell me number, singular or plural, and it may not tell me tense. So what does that look like with examples? So let's just remind ourselves that for finite verb, we're going to be looking for a verb that can stand on its own, and this is a verb within the context of a sentence. Right? So this verb must refer to a particular subject. The verb must hold number, so I should be able to tell singular or plural. And it should tell me the tense in which it occurs for that verb to be finite and therefore the main verb of the sentence. The test that I use is SNOT. So subject, number, own, and tense. And so we're going to be using SNOT in every situation. Let's have a look at this sentence. Twiggy scratched the couch. It's a terrible thing, but it does happen. Can you see the verb in that sentence? It is in fact scratched. So let's test it against SNOT. We're going to firstly find out if we have a subject in the sentence. The subject of the sentence is the who or what before the verb. Okay, the who or what. Who is doing the action or what is doing the action? So, who scratched? The answer is, of course, Twiggy. And because I can answer that, in fact, I do have a subject, so I can move on. How many scratched? Now, some verbs in and of themselves can tell me whether it's singular or plural. Scratched needs a subject to give it some help. So, how many Twiggies do I have? Well, I only have one, so it is in fact singular. What about tense? When did Twiggy scratch? Well, the ED tells me it was in the past, and so scratched does have tense, so it is past tense. And finally, does Twiggy scratch make sense? Okay, does it make sense on its own? Yeah, it makes sense. Twiggy scratched. I know who scratched. I know what Twiggy did. So yes, we now therefore can say that we have a finite verb, and our finite verb is scratched. Let's look at another example that looks quite similar. Scratching the couch. We're once again going to use snot. So when we're analyzing the word scratching, who is scratching in this situation? We actually don't know. So it doesn't say that Twiggy scratched the couch or whoever scratched the couch. You wouldn't know, so I don't have a subject. What about number? In terms of how many have scratched, we don't know either. Does it make sense on its own? So scratching the couch. Well, I couldn't really just say scratching the couch. It feels like it needs more. Don't you agree? And finally, does it tell me tense? When did it happen? Now you might want to say that it does tell me tense, that it tells me it's done in the present tense. But I'm going to prove to you now that in fact it doesn't. Let's actually put scratching in the present tense. So if Twiggy is currently scratching, she is scratching. I actually need that helping or auxiliary verb of is to give it the tense. And in this example, I've used is because I'm going to assume that it's singular. If it was plural, of course, I would make use of the auxiliary are. Are would then give it its number as well. Now look at the past. If Twiggy was scratching in the past, of course, I would add the auxiliary was. And what about if she did it in the future? Well, it would be will be scratching. So in that situation, we can see that by adding these helping verbs or auxiliary verbs, it's actually those that are giving the tense and in most situations, the number in that verb. So in fact, I need a helper for scratching. And we're going to look in the towards the end of the video at verbs like scratching and what they're called. So in fact, scratching is non-finite, and so I don't have a finite verb. What about Twiggy scratching the couch? So now I've inserted a subject. Can I say that I therefore have a finite verb? Well, we're still looking at the verb scratching. And if we look at this verb, we can say, well, who is scratching? We'd say Twiggy. How many? Maybe you'd want to say, well, it's singular because of Twiggy. But in the previous example, I showed you that actually that isn't the case. Is or are would actually give it that singular or plural. But for now, we're going to say, yes, maybe from Twiggy, I could say that I knew it was for a singular subject. But what about tense? And what about it making sense on its own? I still don't know when it happened. And I still can't say Twiggy scratching the couch, therefore, because I haven't actually got all the information I need. So in this situation, even though I have a subject, in fact, scratching is still non-finite because I don't know tense. It still requires an auxiliary verb in this situation for scratching to be used as the main verb of the sentence. I'd have to say Twiggy is scratching or was scratching or will be scratching. I could never leave it on its own. There are a number of auxiliary verbs I could make use of. These are, as I've said before, helping verbs, and these are the most common. Am, could, shall. In the tenses video, I will go into how we make use of those to particularly give tense. But for now, just knowing that these exist and that these help us when we're making use of verbs that end in ing or verbs that need a little bit of help with tense, these are the ones that we make use of. So just keep that in mind. Now let's move on to non-finite verbs. We've understood that for finite, we make use of snot. So what test do we use for non-finite? Well, of course, if it isn't snot, then it must fall into this category. The one kind is that it could be a participle or it could be an infinitive. I have said that it could also be a gerund, but I'm not looking at gerunds today. So we're going to look at participles first. We've got past and present participles. The past participles are verbs ending in ed, and I had to put a little bit of an asterisk there because those ed verbs could also live by themselves. They could also be finite, like in the example I used earlier. So I could say I played, and that could be the finite verb in the sentence. But I can also make use of played as being a past participle. So I can say Twiggy has played with her toy. So I've used the helper has in that situation, and I'm actually making another tense. And you'll see more about that in the tense video. For now, what you need to understand is that verbs ending in ed can both be finite and non-finite, and you actually need to look at the sentence to decide which one it is. But this one can do a little bit of both. There are another kind of past participle, and that's the ones ending in en, things like spoken, taken, broken, eaten, and these can only be past participles. So they cannot transform to be finites as well. And if you think about it, I can never say I spoken to him or I broken it. I would have to say I have broken it to give it the tense required. The same goes for present participles. Those are verbs ending in ing. And so examples like speaking, taking, eating are all verbs that actually need a helper in order to make it complete. And so these can also not live on their own if it's the main verb of the sentence. They can exist in the sentence, but they can't be the main verb. So what does that look like? Well, we're going to see after we do infinitives in an example. So the other category that we're looking at is the infinitive, and these are my two verbs. These can also appear in sentences. So I might say to run, to shop, to scratch, to play. I can make use of these in my sentence, but they won't be the main verb. So I will say, I love to run. Both love and to run are verbs, but love is my finite and to run will actually be my infinitive. The way to remember the infinitive is to make use of Buzz Lightyear when he says, to infinity and beyond. In that situation, we've got to infinity, so I want you to remember that every time you've got to and a verb, it is an infinitive. So to put that together, we've got participles and infinitives, and those can all appear in my sentence. We could see a gerund as well, but we'll be looking at that a little bit later. So let's see if we can put all this information together. We've got verbs in sentences can either be finite or non-finite, and those non-finite verbs, I'm going to look for participles or infinitives. In my sentence, I need to have at least one finite verb, but there could be multiple non-finites. So we're going to make sure that we've got at least one of those finite verbs fulfilling snot, and the others, it's completely fine. So let's look at this example. On seeing the toy mouse, Twiggy sprung into action to play her favorite game. Now we're going to look for the non-finite and finite verb. So the first verb we're going to look at is, of course, seeing. With seeing, can you remember what that fell into? Was that finite or not non-finite? Well, it's ending in ing, so it must be a present participle. And remember, we said it can't be the main verb in the sentence if it doesn't have an auxiliary or helping verb. So is there a helping verb there? Nope. So in fact, I just have a non-finite verb in on seeing the toy mouse. And in fact, if you said that on its own, you'd know it kind of feels like there needs to be more information. So let's move on. It says Twiggy sprung into action. Can you find a verb there? Well, of course, it must be sprung. So let's test it against snot. Who sprung? Twiggy, so I have subject. How many sprung? Well, one, so it's singular. When did she spring? Well, she sprung in the past, so that's my past tense. I've got everything I need then, because it absolutely makes sense. Hey, Twiggy sprung into action. I can understand it. I have a subject, number, and tense. And so sprung is my finite verb in the sentence, and it's my main verb. So let's see if there's another verb that we can find. So Twiggy sprung into action to play her favorite game. So let's look at to play. Can you remember what to play would be called? Right, it's an infinitive because of my Buzz Lightyear, to infinity and beyond. Okay, so try not to forget that. So do you see in this sentence, I've actually got two non-finite verbs and only one finite verb, and that's fine. That finite verb is the main verb of the sentence. And if you think about it, I can't say on seeing the toy mouse, full stop, or to play her favorite game. It's not the main part of the sentence. The main part and the main verb is Twiggy sprung into action. That is the main part of that sentence. And that's all we need. So we have our one finite verb. So today we looked at verbs and we broke it down into finite and non-finite verbs. And under non-finite verbs, we particularly looked at participles and infinitives and saw that these can all be in the sentence, but that we at least need a finite verb in order for it to be a full sentence. We did mention that there were gerunds, but that we weren't going to be covering it today. So I hope that you had a good time during this lesson and that you remember that learning is a journey, not a destination. So I hope you join me next time. Goodbye.